It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey, everybody, welcome back to A Piece of Pie, the queer film podcast. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I am here with my friend and contributor, Matthew. And we have a very special guest today, Mr. Kyle Turner. Hello there.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for coming on. You are the writer of a new book called The Queer Film Guide, and it is out on May 15th, 16th?
May 16th, yeah.
16th. I've gotten, Matthew and I have had a chance to look through some of the entries and stuff, and we're going to talk about Knife and Heart, which was one of the movies that is in the Queer Film Guide. But before we get into all that, I'm just wondering, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to write the Queer Film Guide.
Okay, my bio. So I grew up in Connecticut, and I've been writing about film in some capacity since I was 13. I started a blog when I was 13. I remember that I was talking to someone about like the most recent Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and they were like, "You should start a blog," which I think was their polite way of trying to get out of the conversation at the time. But yeah, I started writing on the internet when I was like a sophomore in high school, and then I started like freelancing in like a more professional capacity and pitching to editors when I was a senior in high school, freshman in college. I went to college for at the University of Hartford for film studies, but then I decided to drop out my third year because it didn't make sense for me. It was the right decision for me. It didn't make sense to get like another $50,000 in student loan debt to help me get a degree that wouldn't help me get further in my writing career than it already was at the time, because I had started freelancing like fairly early. And so for the last like 8 or 9 years, I've just been freelancing for different publications while also maintaining a full-time job. And I've written for GQ and Slate and W Magazine and the New York Times. And I think I like really settled into making queer cinema the thing that I would focus on as I came out when I was like 19. But I had a somewhat generalist knowledge of film. I knew that I wanted to write about film or write about the history of film in some way since I was in second grade. But I was sort of had this self-imposed anxiety of like, oh, I just sort of like know a bunch of random things about movies, but I don't have like a specific area in which I am particularly passionate about or have like an aspirational expertise in. And as I was coming out and sort of looking back at movies that my mother had exposed me to, like The Birdcage and To Wong Foo, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, and Cabaret and Chicago and all these other things which are either explicitly or like culturally part of some way, I decided, oh, that'll be my thing. That'll be the thing that I become interested in. And as I was doing that, film was always a way to sort of like make sense of the world in general, but focusing on queer cinema really allowed me to get closer to like a sense of community, an understanding of queerness as a political and artistic and creative perspective and expression. And since then, since college, I've maintained an interest in the evolution of queer cinema, particularly in relation to the change in political landscape, predominantly a Western political landscape, and especially an American political landscape. But I've always been sort of interested in the get ready to cringe, the dialectical relationship between film and society, and especially queer film. So, last year I was approached by Smith Street Books, the Australian publisher, and they were like, "We would love for you to write a guide to queer cinema. Would you be interested in that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I would absolutely love to." This has been something that's meant a lot to me, both like being interested in queer film in general, but also having the privilege to sort of put down my perspective on the page. And so I'm very excited for this to be hopefully a fun resource for people who are interested in queer movies, are curious about them, or people who have like a little bit of knowledge, have seen like some of the basic classics and whatnot, and are interested in or curious to explore more deeply and a different range of films. Because one of the things I'm particularly proud of about the book is that I think there are a lot of different kinds of queer movies in this. It's not just movies that have like explicitly gay characters or anything. There's also stuff where queerness is some sort of subtext or some sort of like defining aesthetic. And so yeah, that's my deal, as it were.
So I'm gonna jump off of that. That's a fantastic background, and I think, you know, as Brian and I were looking through this book, it's a really cool amount of curation that you've done, and you know, it's impossible to fit all of queer film history into 100 movies. Correct? It's 100 movies. And looking through some of your picks, I was really impressed in that there's this awesome sort of collection of both the very commercially the films that are understood to have had this direct relationship to queer culture in like a more commercial sense, and there's also a lot of really kind of interesting niche picks in there. And so I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about your process of winnowing down. Right, there's so much out there, and as you know, if I could slip another question in the question, you know, you talk about these different echelons of queerness. How would you try to define a queer sensibility for camp, or for, you know, however exactly, like what are you looking for? What's your rubric when you were putting this list together?
Ooh, okay, that's a good question. I love a meta question as well. I love sort of nesting dolls and things within things. But the process was I knew. First of all, like I'm very proud of the book, but I know that this is not the only entry point or gateway to queer cinema. This is an entry point, and I do think that like there, as we've seen with the Sight and Sound list that comes out every decade, that the British publication Sight and Sound, part of the BFI, publishes, like, yes, there's a problem with canon making, and canon making often is exclusionary. However, lists are useful for people. Lists are useful as a way to sort of like find some sort of guide as to where you can look to explore certain things. And hopefully, I hope that this book and others like it inspire people to explore outside of what is actually included in the book. I actually slipped in 200 movies in this book, because there's the main 100 and then there are sidebar entries. And so the process was like, I looked at basically every list on the internet that had like a greatest queer film theme. I looked at all of those, and and sort of created the like a spreadsheet out of those. I looked at all the like books that I actually had and books at the library that were more academic leaning. Looked at like the significant changes and the significant like the watershed moments, either in form or in commercial availability or in style, et cetera, et cetera. And then I sourced from friends. This book would not be possible without like the help of some really wonderful people like Juan Barquin, who is a critic and writer based in Miami, and Feng Lei, who's a critic and curator and writer based in London. Oh, she's in Paris right now, but she's moving to London. She works at Movie. But those two people especially were, and Liz Purcell, who is an archivist specializing in gay pornography, especially at the golden age of gay porn. Those people were really instrumental in helping me helping me cut down and winnow, as you were saying, to the 100 that end up being included as the main entries. And what was important to me, as I was discussing with the publisher, was that this could be like a unique perspective about the history of queer film from both the publisher's point of view as well as mine. Like this, you can get a best queer film list on the internet anywhere you search. You can just Google it. And I thought it was important that if people were going to spend their money on a book form, that there be like a really wide range and hopefully a really interesting range of films. As far as how to define a queer sensibility, I think what I am trying to do with the book is just to unpack and detangle what that might mean. I think it means different things to different people, to different artists, to different creatives. For me, I think what's really important is that there is that there's often some sort of radical implication, that there is an assertion of a perspective of otherness or outsiderness that it is not that is not necessarily coming from within a hegemonic or heteronormative structure or institution, or if it is existing within the institution, that there is some sort of like some subversive aspect or approach to it, because you have like studio films in this, like Brokeback Mountain, which was it's hard to understate how impactful that movie was, even if, you know, looking back on it nearly 2.5 decades later, it seems a little bit more milquetoast. But I think Ang Lee's point of view, I include 2 Ang Lee movies in the book, actually. One, the earlier one, which I think is better, is called The Wedding Banquet, which came out in 1993 and is more of a screwball farce kind of thing. But I think with both, you have this like deep sense of humanity and empathy and an understanding, especially of the way that masculine dynamics play out, both within these hermetic social groups as well as in a broader community, and how that impacts the people around them. And I also want to explore the idea that, like, however circuitous or chimeric queerness can be, however one defines it for oneself, that there are ways in which that artists have been able to tap into it without necessarily belonging to those identities, because they do have a sense of empathy, or they are working with other artists who are capable of accessing that sense of otherness. Ang Lee is one, because he is straight identifying. Bob Foster's Cabaret is in there. There are other films within the book that also sort of play with the ambiguities of like what makes queer art.
I just wanted to say, though, that as someone who saw Brokeback Mountain in the theater, it was only 2 decades ago, not 2.5.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just shaving years off my life.
My apologies.
It's okay. I'm just teasing. No, I want to kind of echo what Matt said. I was impressed with the breadth of selections. Like you said, you can Google queer film, and I know I've done it, and I feel like I've done it a lot, and I feel like I'm a pretty smart guy, but I definitely, like, there was a couple on here that I hadn't heard of, or I'd heard of, but I had never really like The Fly was a good example of, it's a movie I've seen 4 or 5 times by now, but I've never thought of it as a queer film.
Yeah. I mean, David Cronenberg is a really interesting example of a straight artist, or straight identifying artist, who has been able to tap into very particular feelings and experiences of queerness, whether that is intentional or otherwise is cannot yet be determined. But like his films, especially like Videodrome and most recently Crimes of the Future, are dealing with these things about like the body and society and the surveillance of the body and the limits of the flesh. And some really wonderful trans critics like Caden Mark Gardner and Will Caitlin have written pretty extensively about David Cronenberg's relationship to queerness. And so The Fly is a really fun example because it's released in '85. It's about it's a remake and adaptation, and is being released at a time when people who most need pharmaceutical or pharmacological innovation are unable to get it, partially because of institutionalized homophobia. This is really, I'm basically saying that it's an AIDS allegory, an AIDS crisis allegory, but also you have people who have this vast amount of wealth, who are really taking their time as far as doing the research with regards to AIDS, HIV stuff. And then additionally, you have a central love story between Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum, where his entire being and his body is changing. And she still stays with him, basically. She still loves him regardless of what's happening to him. And that is something that so many people during that time, and even today, because the AIDS crisis is not over, have had to experience the person that they love, their very being, or not their being, but their like corporeal being, changing in such a dramatic way and seeing like how far can love go? Can you still love like the I guess the soul, for lack of a better word? And how does that exist in relation to the way that both medical institutions and sort of society at large impact the perception of that relationship in those people?
Do you think that there is a dividing line between queer readings of a film that offers itself for queer reading and an explicitly queer movie? Actually, I don't even know if I want to say explicitly queer, but I sometimes feel that as queer spectators, right, like any movie we watch can be a queer movie because there is, sort of that lens through which we're able to read these things into it. But I also agree that there are certain movies, like the example that you give with Cronenberg, that it's just not entirely a coincidence that a lot of people read the same reading into this sort of thing. So do you feel like there is a significant difference between applying a sort of lens of queerness versus movies that you read as like distinctly queer?
I think the difference is, well, I mean, I think there's like a pragmatic difference as far as like the commercial viability of a lot of these films. Like The Fly does not announce itself, nor technically does Cabaret, as a queer film. Even though maybe Cabaret is not the best example because it's like clearly set in the Weimar Republic, et cetera, et cetera. I think what matters most, rather than like difference, is what the audience or viewer or spectators is able to do with it, how they want to engage with it, how it creates meaning within their life as a viewer, what kind of relationship that they want to create with either with the cultural artifact itself or the artist or like the context within which it exists. I do think it is important to raise the visibility of work by queer artists and about queerness, but I think it is almost as important, if not equally important, to be able to be open-minded enough to read queerness into things, because that is for so long what we had to do, what queer people had to do. Queer people and LGBTQ people who existed within a stifling industry, I think there are frequent enough examples of those readings not being just coincidence or wish fulfillment. There's an academic whose name I'm not remembering, unfortunately, but she was like he was my best friend's professor, and he was doing research on censorship within the Hays Code era. And because there's so much things that had to be censored or excised or omitted, et cetera, because of these moral grounds, you can look at that paperwork, that paper trail, and see that there is subversive queerness within that there is this sense of radical artistry within these things that would normally be seen as like straight cultural objects.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really comprehensive answer, and it's something. I mean, in many of these questions and answers that we've tossed around so far, I think there is this persistent question of queerness being something that's incredibly hard to pin down, which is all the more helpful that you have these numerous canons, as you said, that it's something that we can generate without being too definitive, right? And I think your canon is a really great addition to this ongoing conversation.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, queerness is itself like very hard to define in general. So, I mean, who am I to limit someone's interpretation, especially when it comes to movies?
Well, I mean, our last episode was on the 1993 Super Mario Brothers movie, and inferred and implied queerness in that. We've spent a lot of movies, or we've talked about a lot of movies on this podcast. A lot of them are in your book, like Rope and The Living End and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Yeah, and I'm in the same boat where it's like you can't really. It's like that old definition of pornography. It's like I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I call that the way that I've started processing that is like the middle school closeting response. So if you see something in a movie that if you were to watch this in middle school as a closeted kid and it would make you uncomfortable in the sense that, oh, I have to perform I have to perform straightness while reacting to this, then that movie is probably gay on some
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. That's how I felt about the Phantom Menace.
Interesting. Wait, no, say more about that.
I'm kind of joking, but um a long time ago I wrote an essay about how Darth Maul was a queer icon. And I was like kind of being cheeky about it. But there is a way in which I think that like Darth Maul can be read as like this emblem of self-hating gay masculinity. He has worked and carved his body to be the perfect thing, and he is using it for evil, which is just, talk to anyone who lives in Hell's Kitchen, honestly. That was a regional joke, I guess, for those of whom that live in New York. But and he's got the double blade lightsaber, which is like extremely phallic.
Well, would that be a good transition to move on to Knife Plus Heart, which is full of phallic murder weapons?
Absolutely.
Not even phallic, just straight up penile. Like
yes, straight up knife dildo.
So wait, though, is it? I've been referring to it as Knife and Heart this whole time. Is it? Are we supposed to say Knife Plus Heart?
Okay, my hot take is that the original French title is better. It's called I don't know how to say it in French because the
I bet Matthew does.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm a Frenchie by association, but as you were alluding to, the French title is Un couteau dans le cœur, which literally just means a knife in the heart. I'm not really sure why they changed it to Knife Plus Heart. I have this long-standing theory that part of the imagery in the movie with the crow being so prominent is couteau and corbeau are both similar sounding words, knife and crow in French. That's probably just a complete pulling it out of nowhere, but
that sounds interesting. I mean, I do think A Knife in the Heart is able to speak to the film's romanticism a little bit better than the math equation of Knife Plus Heart. But it is one of my favorite films regardless of the title. I tried when the movie first came out and I made it my personality, I tried to, get people on the train of calling it A Knife in the Heart, but that did not catch on. So I just, went by its American title. Frenchie by association, what does that mean?
Oh, it means that I am not French by family, but I've studied French for a long time, and I went to school for French and film, and I used to work at the Alliance Française in Chicago, and I run this French film group, basically.
Oh, that's so cool.
We have done, and I was telling Brian, we actually did this movie for the French film group a couple of years ago, as part of a series that I called the Nouveau Weird. It was, directors. It was Yann Gonzalez. It was like Quentin Dupieux who did Rubber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was, oh God, who else? Bruno Dumont and his weird like thrash metal retelling of Joan of Arc. I think that this movie kind of situates itself among this like cinema du look revival, kind of like surrealist revival that's happened in like the past 10 years or so. I'm so glad that you chose to include it in your book, and I want to know why. I mean, like you mentioned that a lot of the selection process for this had to do with like political and cultural engagement for the films and a sense of radicalism, right? I think the term you used was you wanted films that sort of represented like a watershed moment. So for you, and especially for a book that comes towards a film that comes towards the tail end of the book because it's ordered chronologically, right? I feel like have gotten, well, I don't know, you might dispute this, but I feel like it's a lot, you have a lot more to pick from in a more contemporary sense. So why did Knife Plus Heart make the cut?
The real reason is that I just really love the movie.
That is completely valid.
I do think that it is a really interesting entry in a culture of queer cinema. I love movies that are, one, about movies, two, about the creation or the construction of desire. And this is about specifically the way in which movies construct desire. So it's just like so much fun for me. And that it is this pretty direct response to William Friedkin's 1980 film Cruising, also is intriguing to me because if Cruising is a sort of like weird critique of, you know, gayness and white supremacy, then Knife Plus Heart sort of links that to a culture of, not in like a not in a moralistic way, but it does link that to a culture of desire as commodity.
Why don't we give you the floor to describe the film for our listeners who have not seen or heard of the movie before? How would you sum up Knife Plus Heart in a little quick summary?
A little blurb, if you will. Knife Plus Heart is a movie that takes place in 1970s Paris, and it is about this gay porn producer played by Vanessa Paradis, who is in the midst of a breakup with her editor. And as she is making her new film, her cast gets killed off one by one by a masked killer. And it's very much neo-giallo. There's a lot of sort of self-referentiality within it. Sort of cinema being the ultimate dominant figure in which we submit ourselves to, and that our desires are sort of constructed through cinema and then sort of fed back to us.
Yeah, the Neo Giallo thing is so interesting. I mean, this movie is so stylish, right? It is it's set in this like 70s, the 70s pastiche, or not even a pastiche, but it's got the synth heavy music of M83 scoring it, which it's the guy's brother, right? It's Jan Gonzalez.
Yeah.
And it's full of sex, it's full of violence, it's full of neon lights, it's full of dildo knives, as we talked about before. And it's really this kind of like surprisingly lyrical movie. I think, you know, one of the things that it continually surprises me every time I go back and watch this movie is how much it kind of advertises itself as this slasher homage, this Giallo homage. And then it kind of it veers sort of away from the realm of horror. It becomes a fairy tale. It's a very, I guess, in short, it's a very sweet movie, surprisingly, a movie that is about a masked killer murdering gay porn stars. It is, without giving too much away, the sort of central story around the killings, as it gets revealed piece by piece, is fascinating and deeply moving. I just remember the end of this movie over and over and over again. It is. Yeah, it's fantastic. Brian, I'm curious because this was your first time watching the film, right?
It was, yeah.
What?
Yeah, I had not seen it before, but I was aware of it because I know you had talked about it. It was a movie you wanted to discuss. I'm sorry, what was your question?
My question was just going to be, what was your takeaway as a first-time viewer on this movie?
As a first-time viewer, I respected it more than I liked it. I see what it's going for. I can see both of your reactions, and I'm sorry. I'm not a huge fan of like Italian horror. And there's a lot of that in this. I liked how gay it was, and I liked how much sex there was in it. And I thought it was like, I liked it like, yeah, I don't know. I think I respected it more than I liked it. I'm glad I saw it. I would find it difficult to recommend to most people.
Really? So another reason why I included this film is that it, to me, strikes a perfect balance as far as recommendation goes, as far as it's like very gay. It's, I think, a very smart and thoughtful movie and moving, as you were saying. It's foreign language, and it's like really entertaining. I think I've seen it like 6 or 7 times at this point, if not more. I actually watched it like pretty recently because they were screening it at MoMA last summer as part of a horror series that they were doing, and it's just like, oh, this is still holds up. It's still really fun to watch. Everyone that I've shown it to has like had a pretty good time with it, just because it's like, even if you take away like the like headiness of it, it's a fun slasher.
Well, that was what Matthew and I were talking about this, and he was saying that and I kind of agree with this because I kind of came into it thinking I was in for a pretty standard but pretty gay, like queer horror movie. Like, so I didn't quite know what to expect, and I purposely didn't watch any trailers, and so I think it's probably a little bit of a victim of like my own expectations in some way. Because, well, I mean, not that I had a ton of expectations. I just wasn't sure what to expect. And it was a lot more Dario Argento than I think I was like in a headspace for when I turned it on. I thought I was going to be a little more slashery silly. Well, and it's not to the detriment of the movie. Like I said, I'm glad I saw it for sure.
Well, in defense of your point, Brian, I honestly think I had a similar reaction to it the first time I saw it, just in that the second half of the film, it really, in a way that mirrors the main character kind of going further down the rabbit hole of the mystery and losing herself in an increasingly fantastical world. It really starts changing genres. It becomes a completely different movie, not a completely different movie, but it becomes further and further away from, your standard giallo inflected horror film, and it becomes something much more akin to this weird kind of phantasmagorical fairy tale, which is something it kind of reminded me actually of Eyes Without a Face for the same reason. It's something that has all of the horror trappings, but really in terms of tone and of imagery, and even of like narrative structure, it rings a lot truer to like a really dark, like Perrault, Cinderella, or no, Perrault didn't do Cinderella, Donkey Skin, fairy tale. And my question is, I'll also side with you on this one, Brian. I'm usually underwhelmed by giallo. I feel like that is a huge sin to admit. But this movie surprised me for exactly that reason. And I feel like doing kind of like a neo giallo homage thing is having its moment right now. It's very hot to do giallo throwbacks, and they're not always very good. This I think just took it in a completely different direction. For me, one of the biggest things is that it didn't feel campy, or it didn't feel kind of self-consciously campy.
I think I was expecting it to be a little lighter, maybe a little funnier. I think maybe a little campier.
Well, and I think that there are elements of this movie that definitely have, I mentioned earlier, like this question of a queer sensibility. So where do we find queerness in the absence of any kind of like explicit, we're not necessarily looking at two men kissing. I mean, in this movie we're seeing a lot of that. But there are elements of queer spectatorship that are just like intuitive, right? And a big part of that in this movie for me is Vanessa Paradis, who plays, she's this French pop star, off of the camera. She's a French pop star, and she in this movie plays this like completely manic lesbian film director who in one of the scenes, one of her things is that she's constantly staging these porn shoots that are uncomfortable mirrors to the actual atrocities of what's going on. And in one of them, she basically plays the role of the murderer and is killed. And somebody says she spent so much time around gay men, she spent so much time watching gay films that she thought she was a fag. And that is like the perfect description of the way she plays her character. And she's got this big gap-toothed visage. So I guess I'm curious, where do you see elements of camp in this movie, and where do you not? Or where do you put this on the camp spectrum?
The camp spectrum, gosh. I think it on a sidebar, I think it's really interesting that that for a long time the internet, at least the last 5 to 10 years, at least that I've been on the internet, anecdotally, people have been sort of using that term very willy-nilly, and I can be very anal retentive about it. And then finally, when I let go, and I'm like, you can't control anyone. They'll just anyone will call anyone anything camp. So be it. Go with God. I'll just have my own little just either definition or rubric for myself. And one of the things that I actually got into a discussion with a group chat about, you have to either be rich enough that rich but self-aware enough that you have a remove and a sense of irony about something, but poor enough that sort of comes from a level of experience. Like very John Waters' sense of camp is like a mode of production. There's a very good book called Working Like a Homosexual, Camp Cinema, and the Aesthetics of Gay Labor or something by Matthew Tinkham. But
I'm looking that up on Amazon right now.
It's quite
Sorry,
good.
go ahead.
And he talks about Andy Warhol and John Waters and some other people. I do think that I don't think that Knife Plus Heart's primary mode of creativity is camp, but I think there is like a level of campiness to the recreation of certain scenes, the fact that it is so self-reflexive, that Vanessa Paradis, I think within a certain niche, is not a gay icon, but like gay people like her. One of my favorite songs is actually her song "Be My Baby." I think the desire to sort of recast oneself or like reenact certain tragedy or trauma and sort of turn it into either a product or a factory of desire or to get some sort of like productivity out of it in a sly, self-knowing way is itself kind of campy. But I would agree with Matthew in that I don't think it's like main aesthetic framework is camp. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really like that categorization of camp as kind of a mode of labor. I've always questioned, and I think this is something that gets tossed around a lot in those kind of interminable internet discussions about camp that you mentioned is it possible to do camp on purpose? And the gut response is no, you can't do camp on purpose because camp is kind of this oh gosh, how do I want to say this? Ooh. Anyway, that argument.
No, you got to do it. Now, you made me do it. So it's your.
I guess I'm foisted by my own petard here, but it's an argument that I think kind of goes nowhere once you consider the work of queer filmmakers like John Waters, like you said, that are sort of affecting a very deliberate aesthetic, one that we kind of universally recognize as camp. Mm-hmm. My whole bet noir is that the more that camp becomes this kind of like commercialized, prefab aesthetic, it stops being fun. Like this is, I don't know if I've complained about this on the podcast before, but Pearl, I appreciate it for what it is. And I like that the character of Pearl, Ty West's Pearl, that is the one from this past year, I think, Mia Goth. I love that the character has kind of become as huge a figure in gay culture as she has. She's joined the ranks of the Babadook on that respect. But the movie, I mean, Ty West is straight, right? I mean, the movie was very much giving, I want to make a camp movie. And for me, it just didn't register as such because it was so self-consciously, trying to affect that aesthetic. So I really like this sort of the way that you phrase it in terms of it not just being a question of intention or a question of, orientation. It's sort of, it's reflected in the process of creating the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you clarified that you're referring to Ty West Pearl and not the Pearl that's Mr. Krabs' daughter on SpongeBob SquarePants.
Oh, no, she is camp.
Oh, yes. She is camp. Absolutely. I think Pearl, the Ty West movie, was giving first draft, honestly. It's fine. X is better. X, I think, I would not say X is camp, but I would say that X is queerer than Pearl. I also think that it is easier to intentionally do camp or to assert a camp aesthetic that is in direct opposition to normative or hegemonic ideas of taste and aesthetics. If you're like the thing about John Waters is that even as he was getting larger and larger budgets, he still didn't have enough money to sort of like make the kinds of movies that were establishing like a normative grammar or language of film. Like he was definitely like coming at it from the outside. And I think that's a really important component to consider when talking about these ideas of like, can something be intentionally camp? And
Well,
I also think that things can be. I'm also of the opinion that things can be camp within things that are not camp. Like I think Lady Gaga and Jared Leto are camp in House of Gucci, even though like the movie around it is not.
that's another example of a movie that seems to be very self-styled camp. But I agree. There is something about there's something very queer art of failure about it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the last I'll say about Pearl before I, stop grumping about it is I
I'm
wonder
happy to
even
grump about Pearl.
I wonder even if there is like an emergent now that camp is kind of like part of some kind of aesthetic superstructure in terms of its just its expression of sensibility. I mean, like Judy Garland, like Wizard of Oz, like that's like camp 101. So be in terms of like getting across like a normative iconography, like that's it's playing on easy mode, like show me something strange. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm done.
No.
By West. I love Mia Goth.
I love Mia Goth. I think X is good. You should, if you haven't already, you should definitely check out Bruce LaBruce's essay Notes on Camp Anti-Camp, because his argument is that in a quote unquote late capitalist hellscape, everything is camp, and it's a matter of like figuring out like what kinds of camp there are. If everything is so gaudy and rooted in artifice or excess, like what about those things are challenging to a particular superstructure or infrastructure? What of those things have or are able to speak to a certain language? I mean, especially if there was this one line, I think Emily Nussbaum is a wonderful writer, she's a very nice person, yada yada yada, but she did write this one piece about Ryan Murphy around the time that The Normal Heart came out, where she said something along the lines of Ryan Murphy took camp out of the closet and into the mainstream. And that to me very much spoke to like, I think Ryan Murphy is like a very good example of someone who is very much self-consciously trying to do camp, even though he hates that term and he prefers to be considered Baroque or whatever, or Rococo. And I think one of the, I think I'm just repeating the same thing. Such an important function of camp ends up being like, what relation does it have to these larger institutions? And if he's like already part of the mainstream, the language that he's the extremely stylized and aestheticized and even distasteful, so to speak, visual grammar that he's using is now just like part of FX's toolbox. It's now just part of certain kind of prestige television, even if it exists slightly on the outside of like what most TV shows are doing. He still is within that infrastructure and doesn't have the irony is just embedded within the like televisual landscape.
So I live in the capture, and there's so much I can blame Ryan Murphy for just personally, but that's just me.
I want to do a Ryan Murphy episode. I'm not kidding, but I also
God. If you do a Ryan Murphy episode, please, I can talk about Ryan Murphy all day. My next book, I would like to be about Ryan Murphy.
Oh, really? Okay.
Not really, but like I do want to write about Ryan Murphy because I think he's like such an important figure within Hollywood's idea of itself in relation to gay politics.
Yeah, et cetera. I'm fascinated by the concept of him, and I'm also fascinated by the fact that you're gonna hate me. I don't like his work by and large.
Yeah. I hate.
I watched every stupid episode of Glee, and I still hate that motherfucker. I think maybe that's why.
Oh, not only did I watch every single episode of Glee, I watched it during its original run, and I quit midway through season 3 because I was in high school and finally developed a sense of taste. And then in 2018, I accidentally got like too high off of an edible, and I thought, oh, what if I revisited Glee? So I started watching the pilot, stoned out of my mind, and I was like not a regular marijuana user at the time, and it's just like, this is so bad but so fascinating. And I made 2 of my friends just watch the entire series with me because I'd never finished it, and I was curious about like where Rachel ended up, like what happened with her, what happened to Lea Michele. And then I wrote, she
was on Funny Girl, and the rest. She was on
Funny Girl, but yes, truly, like art does imitate life, or vice versa. And I ended up writing this like 12,000 word essay about Glee that was just like the entire series through like 10 songs, and it's like how it was the epitome of the Obama era, and it was just like one of the most deranged projects that I gave myself.
Is there, does this live somewhere? Can we
Oh,
find this? Can our listeners find this?
yes, it is. It is available on Medium. I'll send it to you, and you can put it in the show notes or
Oh,
something.
yes, please.
But yeah, I have like an ongoing fascination hate relationship with Ryan Murphy precisely because he has like such an outsized influence in the industry and role and status within the industry, and he dictates a lot of what Hollywood thinks about itself about progressive politics. Like, say what you will about Glee, bad show, but we would not have many of the shows that have progressive politics or casting choices, et cetera, without it. Like,
Yeah.
it was a very much a key text as far as understanding that diverse voices were important from like both a viewer point of view, but also from a market perspective.
Yeah. Also, I want to say Pose season 1 and 2 are both legitimately great, but I also feel like in both cases he kind of, in that, or not both cases because it's one show, but he kind of created it and then let other people do it. And I find that's kind of where I like him the best.
Yeah.
Is when he just kind of hires people that he knows can do it, and he hires those voices and he goes out of his way. And again, I wouldn't say I'm a fan, but I remember when he did the Golden Globes this year, he got his like lifetime achievement, and he was like, the Golden Globes weren't televised last year, so let's give MJ Rodriguez her round of applause that she didn't get last year. I remember thinking that was really amazing. I just wish he wrote better stuff.
That's what Patti LuPone says as well.
Did you have any more, now that we've gone way off topic, did you have any more you wanted to say on Knife in the Heart? Either of you.
Would you like to go first?
Oh, geez. I mean, well, I just think it's really interesting that even though, yeah, we did kind of get in the weeds there with Camp and Ryan Murphy, but that's just what happens when you bring up Camp. It's interesting that it did kind of orbit around this question that you said very early on, in terms of something that characterizes what is so intelligent about Knife Plus Heart is its portrayal of this kind of feedback loop between movies and desire, and movies and the sublimation of these desires into, in the case of the movie, something very violent. And that's something that we, even in our conversation around Camp, it keeps coming up, is this way that movies shape culture, shapes movies, shapes culture. I guess I'm curious to hear you dive a little bit more into that on Knife Plus Heart. I mean, can you explain for the listeners how that sort of operates in the movie without giving away too much?
Well, in the midst of production on her new film, Vanessa Paradis begins making a new film that resembles a lot, that is basically an adaptation of like the investigation into the murders that are happening. And then it becomes, she uses that film as a device to get to lure the killer, because she becomes aware that there's something, is this too spoilery? That there's something that the killer has a connection to the films that she's making.
We usually talk full spoilers, but we didn't say that.
We can just say, I guess, at this point, like, hey, beyond here will be
full spoilers.
Spoilers ahoy! Yeah, she begins making a movie about the police investigation into the murders that are happening to her cast and crew, and there are a couple of people that protest, but for the most part, everyone's sort of on board with it. And at the same time as she's also like going through this very tumultuous and kind of violent breakup with her editor. And one of the images that is most striking to me in the film is of Felix Marteau. I believe his name is. He's like one of the go-to French gay actors, and he's just up against a wall. And you've seen Vanessa Paradis slightly early in the movie, like go into the editing room and take a knife and like start scratching something into like the film reel that is being edited. And when it is played, when her editor plays it back, it says, "You have killed me." And what I think is so fascinating is, one, the reference that that shot is being made of him just on the wall. You can't see what's going on. It looks like he's sort of like um, experiencing something euphoric, possibly getting blown or filleted. That is a reference to Andy Warhol's Blowjob, which is an experimental film from the 1960s, I believe, where it's just this guy, and it's sort of a medium shot from the chest up, and he is presumably being filleted by someone, and you're just sort of meant to stay with the expression as it sort of vacillates between pleasure and vacancy and disassociation. And the idea that film can have the power to just sort of move you through those same emotions, even when you're not like having sex or in some sort of sexual dynamic, but also sort of obliterate your sense of identity or your sense of pleasure, your sense of sexuality, I think is really, really fascinating. And that is one of the many reasons why I love the film, because it has such an engagement with this feedback loop of how pleasure and the moving image have this ongoing relationship with one another.
Yeah, that's a really chilling scene where Anne, Vanessa Paradis' character, writes that she as you said, she like scratches it onto the film reel as a message for her editor after they've had like some big fight to say, "You've killed me," but it's also over, as the editor is watching it. It's and with the actor in the porno like making direct eye contact, or not making direct eye contact with the camera, but like in such a shot that this is like a declarative from him. I don't remember if this is one of the actors that had already been killed or is soon to be killed. Mm-hmm. It's really haunting kind of double meaning.
I think he's died at that point.
Yeah. To be a little bit language nerdy, it doesn't lose effect, but I'm going to be pedantic here. In French, it is clear that it's saying "you have killed me" feminine, so it's clear that it's from Anne, it's not from the guy.
Uh-huh.
But same effect, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and I think it really does. It adds to this element of haunting. Right. Mm-hmm. These dead porn stars who, while alive, they recognize themselves and are sort of haunted by this image of themselves. And then when dead, the film remains as this kind of like, running memorial, but also like a very kind of like Shakespearean ghost.
Mm-hmm.
And the other scene that I just really, really love is towards the end, where sort of, I guess you might call him the final girl, the last porn star. He's admiring his performance as it's being played. The finished product is in a movie theater, and it's in one of those, adult movie theaters that's got like a cruising grounds upstairs. And he leaves, he goes upstairs, and it's you get a flashlight at the very entrance. There's a clerk who rents him out this flashlight because the entire cruising ground is dark, and it's him. It's I think this perfect mix of eros and threat that that you were alluding to before, where as the spectators we kind of get both, right? He's wandering around and the room is completely dark, and the only thing that is illuminated is where his flashlight lands. Mm-hmm. And at this point also that the killer is pursuing him. That you see also a shot of like the killer's boots or something as he comes in and checks out a flashlight too. So you're like, oh shit, you're in trouble, guy. But as he's roaming around, there is this equal sense of threat, like anticipation of a jump scare and of like sex. And a lot of the jump scare, or a lot of the height of the violence comes right at climax, right? That's a consistent thing that happens in this movie. Sex
and death, baby. Love it.
That's right. Nothing better. But yeah, it is. Do you have a favorite scene from the movie, or is there one that particularly gets you?
For me, it's definitely the "You have killed me" scene.
It's a really good one.
Yeah, I love that. And I also really love the opening. I think it tells you what you're going to be in for. And while I agree that, the film morphs into something else and it develops into something more emotional and deeper, which I especially noticed in the last viewing, that's like quite sad, very sad movie. I do think that it really sort of asserts its identity very early, and I like that it is very, very overtly sort of talking back to cruising.
Yeah, I definitely was reminded of cruising a lot watching this. And I thought it was funny when I was in contact with your publicist. She talked about the interview, and I was like, well, is there a movie from the book that he would want to talk about? And the two choices were Cruising and Knife and Heart. And we had already done Cruising. So we went with Knife in the Heart, excuse me. I keep saying that wrong.
No worries. Yeah, those it's I have a definitely a proclivity. I have a proclivity towards sort of darker representations of gayness and queerness, things that are like a little naughty, a little bad.
It's more fun to talk about too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love a problematic fave. What can I say?
Right. Yeah. I get that. No, and like, yeah, we discussed Cruising. It's not a movie. It's the same one where it's like I don't necessarily enjoy it, but I'm glad to have seen it. I'm glad it's there. I've described it to people, and what I found myself when I'm describing it to people, I'm like, you should see it to see it. Like, it really needs to be seen to be believed.
Yes.
And I think that's true of Knife in the Heart as well.
Which of the two would you rather recommend to someone completely like a stranger?
So probably
is this a gay stranger? That's my question.
That's
This is a gay stranger, 35. He's having a birthday party. It's all in his head. There are songs.
Probably Cruising, because I don't think he doesn't seem like a foreign film kind of guy. He doesn't seem a subtitle guy.
Okay.
Something to keep in mind when you're recommending movies to people. You have to be like,
I suppose so. The thing, as you said, as you said, Kyle, like it's a very conscious response to Cruising, both in its sort of like aesthetic mirroring and in its sort of flipping of the switch of the homophobic killer, right? Like in this movie, the killer is this guy who is going after all of Vanessa Paradis' porn stars and killing them in a very systematic way, and killing them in like very highly sexualized, violent acts. Part of the gag, right, is that he always kind of cruises them first and then kills them, usually with a penis or with a dildo knife. And this, I'll put like mega spoilers on this because I really do want to talk about like the end of the movie and what it's revealed. But basically, spoilers. We eventually learn that the killer he had this gay relationship as a teenager on like a farm, and if I'm remembering correctly, it's his father found them, set fire to the barn. His lover died, and he was like horribly disfigured. And then there's like this fantastical element where like the creatures of the forest took him in, and he slept for ages. And then when he woke up and he stumbled into the city, and the first thing that he found himself drawn to was this porn theater where he saw what is implied to have been Vanessa Paradis' movies. And he fixated on this one porn actor who looked a lot like his, he formed like this fixation, right?
Yeah, it's a doppelganger.
Yeah. And so you have, basically the twist being, right, like you were primed to see this killer as kind of this homophobic killer. There is a lot, or self-hating gay or something like that. And there is a lot of commentary going through, like the police investigation isn't really gaining any traction because they deem it to not be, it's only killing gay men. So, what are we doing? And you end up getting like this weirdly sympathetic portrait of the murderer, who is killing not just really out of anger, but out of this sense of, twinning physical intimacy between sex and death. He does this weird kind of rattling moan at the point of orgasm right before he kills everybody. So it's this, the movie is like really invested with this coupling of possession and sexual satisfaction and murder in a way that is really interesting. And of course you get Anne, the film director, played by Vanessa Paradis. She is also a pretty sexually possessive and occasionally sexually violent person. Something that we see a lot in the movie.
I think there's also a twinning between fiction and reality, because the movie that is revealed to have this like doppelganger porn actor is itself a porn adaptation of what happened to the killer. It's the barn burning, but without the burning, it's just like a bunch of twinks in a bucolic area, but it has a close enough resemblance as far as like the emotional beats as to what could have been the possibility for the masked killer and his lover. And so in a way, it's as if she has realized a fantasy he was not able to live out.
Yeah. You say it's funny. You mentioned the twinks in the bucolic area, and that's how the movie ends. That's another of my favorite scenes in this. Is it's kind of like I think it's during the credits. It's kind of like this memorializing afterlife where all of the murdered porn stars are like in this shoot that is against a completely white backdrop, and they're all in these kind of like a Greek garb, and they're like languishing in this kind of beautiful afterlife, and then the camera cuts and they are all just kind of standing around in limbo looking unsure. And it highlights, I think, another thing that I really like about this movie is that even the violence it does have like a really fascinating sense of intimacy to it, not just in kind of like this shock and awe thing of, oh my gosh, sex and death are so close at all times. There is like a really strange sensuality and embrace to all of the deaths. And it makes, I think the killer in this movie is a really fascinating and not utterly sympathetic character, but completely tragic character. It really surprised me the first couple of times that I saw it, how tender the movie was towards, its killer.
Yeah. And I think the post-credit scene, if you will, is one of the more moving pieces or like sections of queer film that I've seen in a very long time, because not only are they in limbo, but they also seem to, the way that the lights go off and the like synth heavy music comes to a stop, and all you can hear is the wind blowing, and it seems to imply that like so much worse is on the horizon for these people, and all they have is like this moment together, either in limbo or on a set, sort of experiencing what little pleasure can be left.
Well, with what little pleasure can be left, do we want to? I feel like it's almost redundant to do it about a movie that is so heavily centered on gay pornography. But Brian, do you want to introduce the Say Something Gay segment?
Sure. The Say Something Gay segment is something I concocted before we ever recorded a single episode, because I imagined that we would spend so much time talking with our film nerd caps on that we wouldn't get to talk about how sexy somebody in the movie was, or how gay something was. A lot of the Say Something Gay is usually about like how hot someone is, or like fashion, something very stereotypically gay. So that's why it's like Say Something Gay about it. We've been a bunch of intellectuals for an hour talking like queer theory. Now let's get gay and talk about like the fashion, or how we want to fuck somebody in the cast, or both.
Well, we fuck someone in the cast in their fashion.
No, because the first like murder victim in his little briefs, like those are so adorable, for sure.
Okay, I think the twink at the very beginning of the movie is very, very cute, and maybe it speaks to some of my darker desires. I don't want to do this one for the record, but I do think the dildo knife scene is hot. It's like horrible and very grotesque and really upsetting, but also hot in a fairly perverse way.
I agree. I think it's hot until it's not. Like it's hot until the knife comes out of the back of the guy's head. You're like, oh, that's fucked up.
Yeah.
But like
exactly.
Up until that point, you're like, I could get into this.
Yeah. I'm plenty of toys. So
yeah, and I also agree with you that the Twinkie boy at the beginning. I really like boys with curly hair. I call it blowjob hair. I'll let you figure that out. But I love that. I just love curly hair. So he was real cute.
Got something to grab onto.
Yes. Yeah.
He's got a great ass. He
Mhm.
just like a nice round peachy thing.
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on my Bob Hoskins say something gay from the Mario Brothers episode. But I was really kind of libidinally fascinated by the kind of weird Italian transplant guy who was on, on the porn team. He's like this foreigner with like a more conventional like 70s porn stash.
Uh-huh.
He plays like the police commissioner in their like porn parody of the real police investigation, and he like gives the guy playing Vanessa Paradis' character like a foot job under the table. It's really
Uh-huh.
funny. It's kind of hot. Yeah. I feel like that's all I've got. I mean, for what it's worth, it is kind of strange for a movie that features, I mean, that lingers so heavily on gay porn. There's not a whole lot of, is there any explicit nudity? I don't think, do we ever even see a penis? We see a butt a couple of times, but and we see what is meant to be like very obviously fake and in exaggerated quantities of cum in the porn parodies.
Yeah.
There's this great scene where the guy who's
It's like a
playing,
men.com video.
yeah, yes, but it's weird. It's like a very sexual movie without being particularly, I just don't think we see full frontal.
Disappointing, and maybe there should be deleted scenes. Um,
Possibly.
I think the closest we get to full frontal, which I'm fine with, is it's also another scene where it's hot until it's not. Where I think Felix Moto, he plays a junkie basically, but the mass killer starts forcing to suck the dildo knife, and um, besides the lack of consent and the fact that it's a knife, I thought that was kind of hot. I'm also like not generally a leather person, and I do have um, limits to the amount of sound of leather that I can handle, which is why I was not really into the strange color of your body's tears. So much noise, so much fully of like leather and that like fabric, or not fabric, but like whatever that stuff is. It was just at a certain point I was just like, I get it, this is S&M. But good in small doses. This film has some small doses of that kind of crinkling, creasing skin noise.
Yeah, the killer in his whole getup is he's wearing, it's kind of Michael Myers-ish, but he's wearing like a full leather suit and a leather mask and like a fake wig. The wig was honestly the creepiest part of his getup to me, but
Mhm.
he's in full Leatherman garb.
Well, I
Mhm.
felt like the face gave me like the face made me think of Vanilla Sky.
Mm.
Oh. You know what? Actually, now that I'm thinking of it, the face made me think of Leatherface, which could just be a pun, but
Mm.
I think
I've
it's the
never
same
thought of that.
idea. I think it's the same idea in both. It's just that he's wearing his.
well, and like the grunts that he makes, because he's like nonverbal, and the only time that we hear him, vocalize is when he's having those kind of like whining, rattling orgasms, and that, I mean, it totally sounds like the sounds that Leatherface makes in Texas
Mhm.
Chainsaw. Huh?
Mhm.
How about that?
The mask also kind of reminds me of the titular mask of the Jim Carrey movie, but when it's not on him, when it's not the green thing, but it's just the totem.
I can see that. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about your book and everything. Could we find you on social media and remind us again? Excuse me, if our listeners are anything like I am, they wait until the end to write things down. So remind us of the name of the book and when it's coming out.
The book is called The Queer Film Guide: 100 Great Films That Tell LGBTQIA plus Stories. It comes out on May 16th from Smith Street Books and Rizzoli. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Well, Twitter while it's still there. At Tyle Kerner, TYLEKURNER. It's just a spoonerism of my name. I'm a very creative person. And you can find my writing across the internet at like the magazine, Salon, GQ, the New York Times, or my website, tilekerner.com. And if you are in the New York area, I'm going to be doing a bunch of events. If you're interested, a bunch of screenings, including Cedar Chuckett IFC Center on May 15th, the wedding banquet at Nighthawk Prospect Park on May 25th. I'm having a book launch party at Nowadays in Queens. That's like a drag event, and that will be on May 16th. And Museum of the Moving Image is doing a series to commemorate the book release of 10 films, and the series is called Queer Cinema Top to Bottom.
That's great.
Yeah, you can thank my friend on the programming committee for that title, but it's a series divided into 3 sections of supertext, subtext, and self-reflexive, and they're bottom, top, and verse. So like the bottom films are like where queerness is subtext, like Rope and The Fly, and the top films are where it's a defining aesthetic, like Corral and O Phantasma, and the verse ones are self-reflexive, like Mulholland Drive and The Watermelon Woman. So if you're in New York and you want to see some queer movies, I'm doing those things. But thank you so much for having me. This was such a good time. This was so much fun.
It sounds like there's a Ryan Murphy one in the future too.
Yeah, well,
and Ryan Murphy. Yes, absolutely. I'm so down to talk about Ryan Murphy.
I don't have like a way in yet, though. Other than just be like Ryan Murphy. I feel like
Is
there
that
has to
not
be at least
enough
like,
and in? I mean, he just got his second Monster season greenlit right before the writers' strike.
Yeah. I did read about that. Yes. But what? Just to sign off real fast, Matthew, can we find you on social media?
Yes, I am at RatJacko on Twitter and Letterboxd.
Excellent. And I am So Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I, ROWE on Letterboxd and Instagram. I deleted my Twitter. You can find the podcast at Piece of Pie Pod on YouTube, Instagram, and I almost said Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
Wherever podcasts are sold, it's also on the
make sure you're subscribed. We've got some fun Pride episodes in the working. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. Thanks so much. And thanks again to Kyle.
I'm also on Letterboxd for the record. Same.
Drop your handle. Is it also Tile Kerner?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Excellent. And with that, adieu. Have a good week, everybody.